Hey, it's William, and this is the 1921 diary series, Grand Duke Dmitri's diaries, and we have today the last of the 2 weeks worth of short entries before we jump 2 weeks ahead and dive into one of the long and expressive ones. Okay, so the date today is the 31st of January, 1921, which means that in Paris on the modern calendar, it's actually the 18th of February. It's a Monday, and Dmitri, as usual, gives us his address, 76 Rue Miromesnil. Sometimes he writes 76 Rue de Miromesnil, and I suppose that's the correct form, but more often than not, he leaves. He uses the just Rue Miromesnil. Okay, what happened? What happened the day before? Well, he went to a memorial service for his father and his half-brother, and then he went to young Dubinsky's for lunch, a member of his information bureau, and then for tea, he went to Sofka Polovtsov's, the wife of Alexander Polovtsov, and while he was there, he met young Dmitri Sheremetyev. Young Dmitri Sheremetyev, who was older than him. He was 36 years old at that time, but he was the younger of two Dmitri Sheremetyevs who were in Paris at that time. All right, so today we get some more information on young Dmitri Sheremetyev, and this is definitely one of the diary entries that has the espionage element to it. So let's dive in. In the morning, Dmitri Sheremetyev came to see me, and then Golevsky, to whom I introduced the latter. Dmitri I know from Ruzsky's staff on the Northwest Front. He had a lot of interesting things to say about certain people who are in almost constant touch with SovDep. Sheremetyev pointed out that these people would be very blank if someone would direct their work, and that is precisely the task for Golevsky. I went to the Travelers for lunch. At the invitation of Lawton, Sybil Frisbee was there. I was very happy to see her. She was in pain and thus blank very poorly. Afterwards, I went shopping with her. Then we went to the Ritz for tea. Sybil was leaving that day for Nice. I stopped by Coco Chanel's for a minute. I dined at the Ritz with the Vichfelds, then went to the theater with them. I went to bed early, so we're divided between business and pleasure here, and there are these two blank words. My plea to any of you who are keeping handwritten diaries or doing handwritten letters is to not try to squeeze any words into the margin, however tempting it might be, because it will be disastrous if 100 years later someone's trying to decipher those. Okay, so just to recap, young Dmitri Sheremetyev was Lieutenant Count Dmitri Alexandrovich Sheremetyev. He'd been an officer in the Cavalier Guard. He had been, before he came to Paris, evacuated from Constantinople. And that's significant because Constantinople was where all of the remnants of General Wrongel's army were evacuated to from the Crimea. They were evacuated to Constantinople, as many as could be gotten there, like a Dunkirk kind of operation, knowing that any who were left behind would pretty much be slaughtered. And then what to do with them? So you have thousands and thousands of Russian soldiers and officers in Constantinople, and nobody particularly wanted them. All the countries agreed to take some. America took some, France and England and some of the Balkan countries, but they weren't, some of them settled actually in Gallipoli, so some of them stayed in Turkey, but nobody particularly wanted them, and they were having a hard time just surviving. And so that's a group of people that rather stunningly Dmitri never talks about. And, Sheremetyev would have been able to tell him about that from direct experience. So, I don't know why he doesn't talk about it in his diary. He surely was aware of it. But, that's a side path. Okay, so Dmitri informs us that he got to know Sheremetyev on the Northwest Front, which was commanded by General, what was his name, Nikolai Vladimirovich Ruzsky. Ruzsky did not survive the revolution for long. He died in October 1918. He was known as the Conqueror of Galicia, and I don't think, though, that he'd been a particularly good or effective general. I don't think Dmitri actually knew him, but Dmitri had been off and on at the front, and I don't think Ruzsky was in charge. No, I'm pretty certain he wasn't in charge of the Russian invasion of East Prussia in August 1914, which was when Dmitri did his actual combat service. Yeah, I don't know, but maybe because the Cavalier Guards were in the same corps as the Horse Guards that Dmitri was serving with, and they also would have participated in the invasion of East Prussia. But anyway, it's not so important, is it? Just that Dmitri knew Dmitri Sheremetyev from there. Interestingly, had not apparently known him earlier, sort of on the social scene. Okay, so Golevsky is there, clearly at Dmitri's invitation. Another general, Golevsky. Golevsky and Gulevich are the two generals who Dmitri has recruited to be agents of his information bureau. Gulevich, as we've seen in recent diary entries, is doing a great job of making contacts and gathering intelligence, and in fact he'd brought this former professor from the University of St. Petersburg, or Petrograd, who had only left SovDep in October 1920, and he'd brought him to talk to Dmitri. Well, and now it's Golevsky's turn. So Dmitri has arranged to introduce Dmitri Sheremetyev to Golevsky, because Dmitri Sheremetyev also has contacts, maybe from when he was in Constantinople. So we're told by Dmitri that these are certain people who are in almost constant touch with SovDep. So they have inside information coming out, I should say, from the Soviet Union. And so, yeah, that could be exactly the sort of thing that the Information Bureau wanted, and exactly the reason that it had been formed by Dmitri himself. So he is designating Golevsky as the perfect person to work with Sheremetyev on this and to develop the usefulness and the contact with these people. So he writes, they would be very blank. I assume it's something like useful if someone would direct their work. Okay, so that is going to be Golevsky's task going forward. So after that, we come to the social part of the day. He goes to the Travelers Club. He finds somebody that he knew in England, I don't have a first name, a title, anything, just that the man's name is Lawton. And this Lawton invites Dmitri to lunch and at the Travelers, and I'd kind of hoped that it was the actor Charles Lawton, who became Sir Charles Lawton, and he's most known in the U.S. for his portrayal of Henry VIII and ripping a bite out of a turkey leg. But Charles Lawton was simply too young at that time to have been the man in question. But this woman that he also invites to lunch, that Dmitri is very happy to see, as he says, Sybil Frisby, she was an actress. And she was specifically a stage actress, and she'd been a Broadway actress. So during the war, but before America had entered the war in 1915, 1916, she had been appearing in some popular play on Broadway, and at the same time she'd also participated in a golf competition in New York in 1915, and so she must have been quite a good golfer, and that certainly would have appealed to Dmitri. And in fact, the two of them, she'd been back in London after the war. I believe she was an English woman, and she and Dmitri had had a fling. They'd had a sexual relationship briefly, if I recall correctly, in 1919. So he writes about that in the 1919 diary entry, and he's very happy to see her. But there's something wrong, and there's this blank word, and poor Sybil is suffering in some way. She's sick or she's in pain, she's not doing well, but that notwithstanding, they go off shopping together, and then they have tea at the Ritz, but it would be, just a get-together in passing, because Sybil was leaving that same day, maybe on an evening train for Nice. Maybe because of whatever physical complaint she had, to go and try to recover or recuperate. So then what does Dmitri do? Well, he stops by Coco Chanel. So the Ritz is sort of the center of things at the moment, because his friends, the Vichfelds and Coco Chanel, are all staying there. So he stops by her suite or her rooms, and he doesn't say if he found her at home or not. If she was at home, apparently she was busy, because he was only there for a minute. So I guess she must have been at home. He stopped by for a minute. And he seems to be the one who's pursuing this relationship more than she is, because a few times now he's dropped by and found her at home, and, they'd gone on a walk or something. But she's not spending a lot of time with him. He's kind of trying. That's the impression that I get. But he's still, as you see in this diary entry, he's still calling her Coco Chanel, for the most part. I think he said Coco a couple of times, but he's mainly still calling her Coco Chanel. So their relationship is not on a strong footing as yet. So then his backup is his friends, the Vichfelds, and he goes to the theater with them. Apparently not back to this Moscow Review that he likes so much. And then he goes to bed early. It kind of a so-so day, right? So, as I said, this is the last before we dive into the long entry, which begins on the 15th of February in the old style, and which Dmitri is writing in Copenhagen, in Denmark. And as is very typical for him, he is really an impressive, I would even say a great diarist, because he's so observant about things and so sort of systematic. And so he's going to start by telling us all of his impressions of the city, and then he's going to narrow his focus and talk about the mindset of the Danes, their psychology, so to speak, and how they feel in relation to various other countries, how they feel in relation to Russia, And then he's going to go on and talk about the Dowager Empress, and talk about the social scene in Denmark, and talk about the Lamings, not the Lamings, sorry, the Marlings, who were his friends and protectors and surrogate parents in Tehran. And so, yeah, it's going to be, in his very insightful, observant, and detailed way, he's going to set us on a solid footing in Denmark. So we are heading straight toward a crisis for Dmitri, and it's a crisis that is finally going to bring him and Coco together in a way where they're really together. They're really a couple and go off together. So yeah, that's coming up. It may seem a little mysterious at this point, and what the relationship to that is to Denmark and to Germany and to some places Dmitri hasn't been yet. He really wasn't well traveled compared to other Grand Dukes and other royals, and he really was. The more I read these two things in conjunction, the 1907 diaries and the 1921 diaries, having read the other parts of his adult diaries, the more I see that Sergei did kind of keep his little household in isolation. So Dmitri, even after Sergei's death, he still was the rest of his youth was overseen by his Aunt Ella, and he never did a grand tour or anything like that. And so, he and Maria were kind of, and Sergei and Ella were kind of a little bit like the provincial branch of the family, even though they were in the big city in Moscow, and in the traditional capital, they were still a little bit out of the loop, which is interesting. So when Dmitri goes to these various new places, it's a little bit odd sometimes to realize that he'd never been there before. Okay, so yes, I just have been reading this excellent book on the political group that Dmitri would join in Paris in the 1930s called Young Russia. And there's a Russian author by the name of Viktor Kosik who wrote a book on that. And I'm reading the introduction at the moment, so I've got a long ways to go. But one of the things that the author says about the reason why he decided to write this book is because he wanted to delve into the psychology of the emigres' perception of the processes taking place in their homeland. So yeah, that's a quote about the psychology of the emigres' perception of the processes taking place in their homeland. And that's exactly what Dmitri, it's almost even in the same wording that Dmitri was trying to discover through his information bureau at that time in 1921. All right, I'm being a little long-winded, so I'll stop. This is all such interesting stuff, and do please come back, and I'll see you next time.